Welcome, everyone, to another YIVO Fellowship lecture. Today's lecture is the Max Weinreich Fellowship Lecture in Eastern European Jewish Studies. This lecture was funded by the Professor Bernard Choseed Memorial Fellowship and the Natalie and Mendel Racolin Memorial Fellowship. Our lecturer today is Professor Dana Mihăilescu, who is an Associate Professor of American Studies at the University of Bucharest in Romania. She was a Fulbright Junior Grantee at Brandeis University and the Edith Krieger Wolf Distinguished Visiting Professor at the Crown Family Center of Jewish and Israel Studies at Northwestern University. Her main research interests and publications focus on Jewish American studies, Holocaust, child survivor testimonies, graphic narratives in the Holocaust, trauma and witnessing, ethics and memory, migration from Eastern Europe to the United States. She's the author of articles in venues such as Melus, Rethinking History, Shofar, Journal of Modern Jewish Studies, East European Jewish Affairs, American Imago, Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and of the monograph Eastern European Jewish American Narratives, 1890 to 1930, Struggles for Recognition, which was published by Lexington in 2018. Professor Mihăilescu's lecture today is entitled To America on Foot, Romanian Jewish Fusgeyers from 1900 in History and Memory. And if you have any questions for Professor Mihăilescu afterwards, please leave them in the Q&A section of the chat. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor Dana Mihăilescu.
Thank you so much, Eddie, for this generous introduction. And thank you very much to YIVO for this fellowship that actually gave me the opportunity to use the YIVO archives that proved to be really important for my research. What I'm going to do is basically give you the main signposts of this movement, the Fusgeyer movement from Romania, which happened some 125 years ago in 1900. Between 1880 and 1924, approximately 2.5 million Jews from Eastern Europe left the region and settled in the United States, while many others were going to Canada, becoming known as the Great Wave of Jewish Migration. During this period, the consolidation of many nation-states occurred. In the region of Eastern Europe, as you can see in the first map on this slide, Romania had long been under foreign domination, being at the crossroads of three main empires, the Russian Empire, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. It only established itself as an independent national state in the second half of the 19th century, and you can see how it was looking at the beginning in the center map on this slide. This great wave of Eastern European Jewish immigration therefore occurred in the wake of Romania's formation as a nation-state by the Union of Moldova and Wallachia from 1859 until the Declaration of Independence in 1877, and then during its consolidation as a nation-state from 1878 to 1914. At first, Jews were not recognized as Romanian citizens following Article 7 of the 1866 Romanian Constitution, which stipulated that only Christian foreigners could gain Romanian citizenship. Despite the international pressures of the 1878 Congress of Berlin that the recognition of Romania's independence be conditioned upon its granting of full civil and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of their religious affiliation, Romanian authorities responded with a subterfuge. They merely modified Article 7 to permit but not guarantee the naturalization of Jews on an individual basis after a complex and lengthy procedure involving the fulfillment of several conditions. Only in 1919, the changed Romanian constitution finally granted full civil rights to Jews. In the first decade of the 20th century, Jewish immigration from Romania increased proportionally more rapidly than that of any other country of Jewish mass migration, making lawyer and scholar of Romanian Jewry Joseph Kisman apply the designation of Romanian exodus to it in his YIVO studies, first published in 1942 in the YIVO-bleter and then as a full-length book, also by YIVO in 1944. This was happening, as he also showed in the statistics that were part of his work, because nearly 30% of Romania's entire Jewish population immigrated to America between 1881 and 1914. The specific character of the Great
I'm sorry, Donna.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah. A few people in the chat are asking if you would speak a bit more slowly.
I'll try to do that. Yeah, I'll try to. Okay. The specific character of the Great Wave of Romanian Jewish immigration, in comparison to neighboring Eastern European countries, was imposed upon the whole movement by one group of migrating masses that marked the beginning of the Exodus. This involved bands of Fusgeyers or wayfarers that began to migrate after the economic depression of 1899 and after new discriminatory laws and educational restrictions targeting the Jews of Romania, the most significant of which you have on this slide, but also because of rekindling anti-Semitic feelings, as shown, for instance, in 1899 in Iași, when students and authorities were actually in the process of doing a pogrom against the local Jews. According to Leo Wolfson, whom you can see on this slide, one of these Fusgeyers who emigrated from Vaslui to the United States in 1900 and soon became a Jewish leader and the president of the Federation of Romanian Jews of America, whose works are available at YIVO, as well as the fact that he continued in the United States to actually help the Jews of Romania through all sorts of performances that kind of followed in what the Fusgeyers were doing. So according to him, the Romanian census from 1899 numbered a population of almost 6 million people, of whom over 269,000 were Jews. This was the second largest group of people after ethnic Romanians, making up 4.5% of the population. Between 1900 and 1911, some 65,000 Romanian Jews emigrated out of Romania to different new countries. Of this, between 1900 and 1903, around 20,000 Romanian Jews came to America. In the peak year marking Fusgeyer's migration, 1900, some 20,000 Romanian Jews started their emigration on foot from Romania, of which, as you can see for the year 1900 in the second table, here, over 6,000 were coming to the United States. Another element of the impressive character of Romanian Jewish emigration consisted in the fact that Romanian Jews represented 87.5% of the total number of immigrants from the country to the US during the peak years of emigration from 1899 to 1914. And if you look at the year 1900, you will see that at that time they represented 95.7%. The small percentage of Christian Romanians emigrating at this time, just over 11%, out of the rural Romanian society, is indisputable proof that the Fusgeyer movement was not primarily resulting from the economic depression of 1899, as Romanian officials claimed, but was a bursting bubble because of the time's bad treatment of the Jews by the Romanian society. From what I could find and corroborate from archival sources, the Fusgeyer groups by and large walked out of Romania only from April to July 1900. This follows from the covering of the topic by the mainstream newspaper Adevărul, which starts on 28th of April 1900 with an article about emigrants from Bârlad, and ends with a July article in the same year entitled Jewish Emigrants in Canada. This coverage timeframe can be explained by the fact that from July 1900, Fusgeyer groups started to be repatriated or not allowed to cross the border out of Romania, given new restrictions taken primarily by the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, leading to a temporary halt of emigrants' ambitions. In point of restrictions, in mid-June 1900, the Austrian-Hungarian authorities announced that they would admit only those that had direct train tickets to Hamburg, London, or Paris to avoid the extremely poor Romanian Jewish immigrants from remaining a burden in their country. The German government, too, announced in late June 1900 that it would admit emigrants only if they didn't come from states with diseases like cholera, plague, leper, or measles, in order to prevent the emergence of a new epidemic, like the 1892 cholera epidemic of Hamburg, and they had to carry along a medical certificate. They were usually boarded on sealed Auswanderzüge, emigrant trains, directly to harbor cities in Germany or to the border with the Netherlands, as Tobias Brinkmann has shown in his recent book, Between Borders. Despite these growing obstacles, at the end of 1900 and from 1901 to 1903, Romanian Jews ready to emigrate continued to ask for help and at least symbolically took up some of the Fusgeyer emigrants' paraphernalia. This transpires, for instance, from what you can see here, some dozen 1902 letters from Jews in Romania available at the Center for Jewish History in Bucharest, and the 80 letters for help from across Romania received from April 1900 to May 1911 by the Jewish Colonization Association. This actually shows that we can speak of two categories of Fusgeyers, the actual Fusgeyers that only left from April to July 1900, and symbolic Fusgeyers, who no longer went on foot inside Romania from one city to another, but actually used the same methods as the Fusgeyers did in order to get help from different, especially Jewish institutions. Terminologically, in Romania, these groups did not become known as Fusgeyers, the Yiddish term that has gained currency in the US following the Yiddish language memoirs and historical accounts published by YIVO at the end of World War II, which sparked a long-lasting interest for new generations of Jewish Americans. And here, the most important memoir is that by Jacob Finkelstein from 1942, written in response to a YIVO competition on the topic, Why I Left Europe and What I Have Achieved in America, and actually consisting, as we can see from his archives, in something like 96 pages of written text, of which a very short part, 22 pages, were actually published in the YIVO-bleter in 1945, also adding a map of the main trajectory that the group had, which showed that he was actually going with the second group of wayfarers from Berlad and not the first one, as he sustained. The umbrella term under which these groups were referred to in Romania from the outset was that of emigrants on foot, following the term used by the person who came up with the idea. Egalitatea, the Jewish weekly paper from Bucharest that most thoroughly covered this immigration movement, also contributed to the dissemination of this term. Firstly, as you can see in the first image on this slide, on 5th of May 1900, it featured a front-page editorial entitled De ce pe jos, Why on Foot, by its director M. Schwarzfeld. Therein, he discarded the anti-Semites' idea that all Jews were rich and some of them decided to go on foot as a fad. Instead, he exclaimed that it was the poverty and lack of prospects that made Romanian Jews emigrate on foot, and this form of emigration was not a simplistic form of publicity and demonstration, as some official papers wrote. Their aim, which was also sustained in Finkelstein's memoir, was to reach the new targeted country, and only by going on foot could they hope to achieve it. Secondly, as you can see on the right-hand side of this image, as the emigrant groups who were living became more numerous, the paper introduced a section called Emigration on Foot, which ran from May 1900 to July 1900. The emigrants themselves chose different variants in Romanian to call their groups by, most often the wayfarers, the pedestrians, or the wanderers. To be entirely correct, in the US too, the initial term to designate the movement in both English and Yiddish was that of emigrants on foot, which appeared in the English language Jewish and mainstream press from the early 1900s US, but also in the July and August 1900 issues of the most read Yiddish language forwards, as you can see in the titles that I placed on this slide, in which they were referring to Gruppe zu Fuß. As well as in the autobiography, this time written in English, the first image on this slide, An American in the Making, first published in 1917 by a member of Wayfarers from Vaslui, Emi. Nevertheless, especially from the 1980s onwards, the term Fusgeyers has been used in the US in English language genealogical accounts by descendants of Fusgeyers, like the following two images that you have on the slide, in musical projects recuperating the klezmer music of Eastern Europe, such as Yale Strom's 2005 De Fusgeyers, in Jill Culliner's 2000 Travelogue, Finding Home, and in some novels and a biography, the most important of which you have on the slide, which were noting in passing these emigrants. Simultaneously, a limited number of literary authors in the US have chosen English language variants, such as Stuart Tower, who titled his 2003 historical novel The Wayfarers, one which actually inspired a heritage tour that was taken to Romania in 2005 to recuperate this kind of trajectory of the wayfarers that he was speaking about. And Barbara Kahn, who wrote in 2009 the play Walking from Romania, focusing on what women Fusgeyers might have gone through and showing it across New York City. The idea of the first Fusgeyer group came from Berlad in May 1899. And this was the place where 2/3 of the whole number of Jews were living in Romania at the time, because this was the region of Moldova. It was an outgrowth of the climate of tension in the town, fueled by permanent agitations targeting Jews due to militant nationalist organizations. It was due to a young man whose name was Sami Ginsburg. The fullest account about the emergence of the first group and the idea of walking out of Romania is due to Avram Axelrad, who wrote poems for this Fusgeyer group's single-issue newspapers and published them as a collection entitled Towards the East in 1900, which I could actually only find here at the YIVO archives in Romania. It's no longer available in any kind of libraries. And it included, for instance, one of the poems that he wrote, The Wayfarers, after the name of the first group that left from Berlad, the motto indicating that it was written on the occasion of the emigration on foot of 70 young men. In a retrospective article from 1938, Axelrod explains that Sami Ginsburg came up with the idea of emigration on foot in spring 1899 while sitting at a table from a tea shop in Berlad. Ginsburg was a young accountant who had become unemployed. He often used his spare time to write poems and publish them under a pen name in the local newspaper. The Fusgeyer society he and his young followers formed around March 1900 elected Ginsburg as its leader, and the group soon numbered over 50 members, young craftsmen without a job and shop assistants that had been fired. Finally, 69 adults and 2 children left from Berlad in April 1900, and they arrived in the US in the number of 105. In the throes of hunger, they were absorbed by Ginsburg's idealism and determined to start on foot on the first spring day, even if it meant that they had to walk to the end of the world. They were soon caught up under the spell of Ginsburg's words and promises that were also mentioned in Finkelstein's own Yiddish language account, which ran like this, and I'm going to read the reminiscences of Axelrod, and I quote, "We will go on foot from one city to another. We will sing, we will recite, we will offer theatrical performances, and thus win our bread and onion to the next city. Thus we will get to the border and even beyond to Vienna, where Jews are richer and more generous. And if they aren't, we'll go farther in sandals or with our feet bare, if need be to Hamburg, where we will board a ship or else end up at the bottom of the ocean." Axelrod mentioned how he himself contributed to writing poems and articles, as you could see this one's here too, in the first single-issue newspaper the group published in 2,000 copies in April 1900 and immediately sold out. The Fusgeyers also published the manifest Long Live Romania on the day of their departure, 19th of April, explaining their pain to have to leave Romania and their reasons. This included the poem America, presenting the family separation these emigrations entailed, usually the man leaving in order to find a job that could end the family's hunger, as the mother tries to explain to her child why the two are left back in Romania. After boarding a ship in Hamburg, they arrived in New York in early June 1900, where they were initially retained at the border as paupers. They were freed and allowed to enter the US only after the intervention of 2 lawyers from the United Hebrew Charities, the president of B'nai B'rith, and a millionaire. Alongside Finkelstein's 1942 YIVO memoir, Kisman's YIVO historical studies, and Baravi's 1961 book on immigrants on foot from Israel, the April to July 1900 issues of the Jewish newspaper Egalitatea, the Zionist weeklies Aurora and Răsăritul, and the official Romanian newspapers Adevărul and Universul continuously published reports about the trajectories and characteristics of Fusgeyers. Taken together, these accounts provide a comprehensive outlook on the general characteristics of Fusgeyers. Following the example of the first wayfarers from Berlad, on leaving, the over 100 groups of trackers published most often a one-time paper with information about them, which they sold so as to increase their trip funds. There were over 100 such one-time publications, of which in 1951, a YIVO-bleter article managed to precisely identify 61. Of this, I could currently track only 6 papers still available in the archives, and the most significant of them are the ones that I placed on this slide. This one-time, usually 4-page papers by Fusgeyers were most often written in Romanian, sometimes Yiddish or German being used for a final page, and there were very few Yiddish language versions or German-only versions. The titles of the papers ranged from indicating the location of origin of the group it served, as the third one, the wayfarers from Iași that you see here, to highlighting the pain of saying goodbye and regret for living behind Romania, with titles like Farewell or Cries of Despair, or to mentioning the immediate aim of the group, as the first newspaper on this slide, Give Help. The initial newspapers of the first group of Berlad wayfarers were used as inspiration for further publications by new groups, and the same titles were oftentimes reproduced in the Berladiers mentioned as heroic trailblazers. Many of those that wrote this line of papers were not part of the emigrant groups, but young Jewish students, journalists, or writers like Avram Axelrod. In these papers, they included appeals for help to Jewish brothers and Gentiles, poems recited by Fusgeyers on their way out, stories, letters, and general articles about the miserable conditions of Jewish life in Romania that determined them to emigrate, and sometimes the list of the Fusgeyer names from the group. The articles published in this one-time publications put forth a double-ended rhetoric of the Fusgeyers, and I tried to give you some snippets of what I mean by that. On the one hand, these articles mark the Fusgeyers' declaration of independence from the discriminatory atmosphere affecting them as Jews in Romania. This was their main message to the Western countries as they moved towards them and hoped to find a welcoming new home country. On the other hand, they transmitted their hopeful belief that their emigration would result in a smaller number of Jews remaining in Romania, which could hasten the end of their sufferings and persecutions by their recognition as Romanian citizens, in keeping with their fully adopted Romanian lifestyle. And I think that this is why they primarily chose Romanian as the language to write these newspapers in, because this was a sign of their loyalty and internalization of Romanian values, to which they added from time to time what you have on the right-hand side. Poems not only written by Jewish Romanians, but actually written by the most successful Romanian poets at the time. This way of constructing the newspapers was a witty, sarcastic message primarily targeted to Romanian authorities and people, and prompted a new attitude towards the Jewish question. These newspapers often contained a Zionist or a socialist tone too. This was connected with the fact that at the turn of the century, Zionist Jews and socialists worked as allies, as indicated by the fact that Zionist papers announced the publications of the socialists and vice versa. And after arrival to the US, some Fusgeyers letters were published in the Zionist weekly Răsăritul, and you see actually the person who came up with the idea having his letter published there here, and also in the socialist weekly Revista Idei. Additionally, local Jews and sometimes Christians too, including poor peasants from the areas, donated further money, as well as medicine, glasses, horses, and local food products to ease the Fusgeyers' passage out of Romania, as Finkelstein mentioned in his YIVO memoir, and as it transpires also from this one-off publications. Fusgeyer groups also got travel funds from the theatrical performances they offered in the various cities they transited on their way out of Romania. Sometimes they were helped by professional theater troupes who performed in transit cities on their behalf, especially the case of Mihăilescu from Bucharest, whose plea for material help for performances predated the emigration movement, as you can see from this playbill that I found in the YIVO-bleter collection, which shows that in 1899, a play that in May 1900 he was performing to the benefit of Bucharest pedestrians was offered for his own material well-being. In most cases, however, it was Fusgeyers themselves who performed the plays. For instance, the New Wayfarers of Bârlad performed Mad for Love in various locations. The pedestrians from Buzău performed Goldfaden's play The Sacrifice of Isaac and Râmnicu Sărat. Other groups performed the plays King Saul, The Last Farewell, Buried Alive, The Jewess, and most often Goldfaden's Bar Kochba, for which David Hirsch, who was a very well-known musical notation and soloist at the National Theatre in Bucharest, was in Romania. And this might also explain why the Fusgeyers would actually go, especially for Goldfaden's and Horowitz's most successful plays, because he was working together with these people and also with Avram Axelrad, who was writing some of the newspapers of the Fusgeyers. The titles of the operettas indicate that theater, apart from being a means to amass funds, was also an important tool to unify the Jewish emigrants by focusing on Judaic historical figures, suggesting the Jewish capacity to endure and prevail against persecutions. The plays performed by the Fusgeyers marked the shift of themes put forward by the father of Yiddish theater, Abraham Goldfaden. If in 1876 up to the 1890s, when he offered the first Yiddish theater pieces in Iași, he made fun of Hasidism and emphasized the abusive functions of traditions on everyday Jewish life via a satiric theater of contemporary Jewish folk types, as shown by Seth Wallitz and Elissa Quint in their studies. After the increase of anti-Jewish persecution in both Russia and Romania, including the Tsar's banning of Yiddish theater in Russia in 1883, he developed a theater of national expression consisting of plays and operettas based on Jewish historic and religious references, providing what the audience needed: romantic escape and supportive historical affirmation. Highly relevant in this respect is his play Bar Kochba, about the hero of the last Jewish revolt against the Roman conquerors, most frequently performed by Fusgeyer groups, as you can see from this Fusgeyer group's playbill by the Tikvas Canada Fusgeyers from Pașcani, who were offering it in order to raise funds for the 200 starving people on their way towards North America, and this is again available in the YIVO Yiddish Theater collection. Inspiring Fusgeyers to break free by emigration, Goldfaden's musical melodrama Bar Kochba established Yiddish theater as a means of celebrating Jewish history and heroics and asserting their self-consciousness by recovering an image of dignity and nobility and a model of Jewish heroics for the present, a military hero. This fueled the Fusgeyers' imagination that their form of emigration, primarily towards North America, epitomized a similar act of bravura, courage, action, and Judaic resolve in response to insult, by refusing the oppressor and providing a new solution to their exilic condition. Such plays became the means to creatively channel the anger, bitterness, and revenge towards Romania on the part of Fusgeyers by highlighting in their performances the wit and resourcefulness of their oppressed community through a new consciousness embodied in their courageous act of emigration. The total number of Fusgeyers is not precisely known, but does not represent more than a few tens of thousands, with a group usually ranging from 40 to 300 people. One approximate estimate of the number of Jews that emigrated around 1900 as Fusgeyers belongs to journalist Israel Marcus, who mentions there were at least 16,000 people, excluding those who were returned. Most often, the numbers of a group increased on the way out of Romania, with new local Jews joining the movements. Even if around 80% of emigrants were within the 15 to 30-year-old age range, as it happened with the first wayfarers of Berlad, not only young Jews left. There were often subsequent groups that included old men, some sick-looking and not good for work individuals, as well as children that could be as young as 6 to 10 years old, which made Western countries impose criteria determining desirable and undesirable Romanian Jewish immigrants. Also, even if the first group of wayfarers from Berlad was made up of men only, other groups also included women, and there were women-only groups, like the Basami group from Berlad. The Fusgeyer groups usually had a uniform in which they dressed, which increased their sense of unity and belonging. And you can see this, for instance, from the chronicler of Piatra Neamț, Joseph Kaufmann, who included it in his study of the region. Usually this meant a blue cotton duck uniform, caps or straw hats, and sandals, the girls having a blue calico uniform or black dresses. Some marched in military style, especially if they had been drafted in the army, and oftentimes carried a personal water can, sunglasses, lanterns, and tents. As has become clear, a visual record of Fusgeyer groups is still in circulation, numbering around 10 photos. Some of them, like the first image on this slide, were photographed in transit cities on the group's way out of Romania and were kept by Romanian Jews and then made available at the Center for Jewish History in Bucharest. Other Fusgeyers carried the photos with them to North America, and they were later given to the YIVO collection, as you have the second image on this slide, or this one, which is actually forwarded through Finkelstein to YIVO for Joseph Kisman, who was working on his book-length study on the history of Romanian Jews. And Rabbi Yasha Steinberg, who had been born in Romania and came and settled in Winnipeg, was actually sending it through Finkelstein in case Kisman might want to actually attach it to his study. And I also found in the Leo Fischer file, who is one of the person that became a leader of the Union of Romanian Jews, also started by a Fusgeyer, a letter from 1928, which was sent by a very well-known typographer and bookseller from Iași, Elias Sharaga, who had been one of the witnesses of the Fusgeyer departure with the first group of wayfarers from Berlad when they were passing towards Iași. Drawings after these photos were sometimes published in Romanian newspapers too, as you can see this image of the Fusgeyers from Galați. A sense of dignity, military-like organization, and elegance of the Fusgeyers exuded from the visual record of such emigrating groups, that you can also see in this other photo that is available in the YIVO archive with the Bucharest pedestrians. Also pointing sometimes to their dress code, as it's most clearly seen here, that would permit them comfortable walking under diverse weather conditions, especially thanks to the caps on their heads and the sandals on their feet. Simultaneously, the photos were meant to indicate the Fusgeyers' rather well-organized departure by including the image of a carriage for trudging along their luggage and food, as well as the multiple lanterns the group were equipped with for nighttime. And what is interesting is that the same sense of unity and solidarity that these groups of Fusgeyers created was continued in the US by the establishment of Landsmannschaften very close after arrival by members of the Fusgeyer groups. And I could find this in the case of the Independent Bucharester Benevolent Sick Aid Association, which was founded in 1901 by 18 people that were described in the typical way in which the Fusgeyers would be referred to, very enthusiastic young men. or in the first Perlader Romanian Benevolent Association, who originally had 9 members that formed it, one of whom being for sure a Fusgeyer from the first wayfarer groups that left from Berlad in 1900. Soon after their arrival at the barge office, the US encouraged Jewish Fusgeyers from Romania to settle in other cities than New York, where they already had a great influx of Jews who were living in very dire conditions on the Lower East Side. US newspapers constantly covered the issue of Romanian Jewish immigration on foot from October 1900 to 1902, both in the Jewish press and the major mainstream press. One of the earliest articles appeared in the New York Times, and you can see it here, in October 1900, under the title Jews Leaving Romania, Wholesale Emigration Owing to the Severities of the Laws Against the Hebrew. It recounted the large numbers of moneyless Romanian Jews arriving at the immigration station from New York for the past months, who were initially refused entrance so as not to become public charges. In the US, the American Hebrew offered the most comprehensive coverage of the lot of Romanian Jews from 1899 to 1902, and it is available through the YIVO library, including a thorough presentation of the trips to Romania and reports by Robert Watchern, the US government special agent sent to Romania by the Immigration Department in summer 1900, and the paper's correspondent, David Blaustein, the superintendent of the Educational Alliance, asked by them to accompany Watchern and offer his own eyewitness account of Romanian Jews' condition. And if Watchern actually followed the Romanian account of why these emigrations had been going on because of economic depression, actually, Blaustein said that anti-Semitism and the laws against the Jews were also a significant part of why these people were emigrating, and this emigration needed to continue. And he considered that the need was to actually create English language pamphlets that would explain more clearly to these people the American system of life, so they knew what they were expecting on getting to America. The US papers also largely published a singular political response to the Fusgeyer-derived immigration crisis. This was Secretary of State Hayes' 11th of August 1902 note addressed towards all the government signatory of the 1878 Berlin Treaty, the countries which recognized the independent Balkan states that had been hitherto under the foreign influence of the Russian or Ottoman empires. Hayes' note was published widely in the press in September 1902. It decried Romania's treatment of local Jews as a violation of Article 44 of the Berlin Treaty. In the name of the US, though not a signatory to that treaty, Hay made appeal to the principles consigned therein because they are the principles of international law and eternal justice, asking the co-signatories of the treaty to press Romania to comply to Article 44 and emphasizing the US is welcoming voluntary immigrants except for the popo, the criminal, the contagiously or incurably diseased. The Western European official powers ended by rejecting the claims of the Hay Note and did not follow on his plea. Instead, the complicated diplomatic layers serving the various interests of Romania, Western European countries, and the US were used by each country to dismantle the other, while the flesh and blood Romanian Jews were used at the political level as puppets to laud one's own country's policies or critique those of other countries, instead of genuinely trying to find a solution and better Romanian Jews' lives. The Fusgeyer movement later became incorporated in children's and especially grandchildren's growing interest in their family genealogy in the US. This was becoming a dominant aspect of American society from the 1980s, when especially grandchildren of Fusgeyers started to publish some reminiscences and results of serious research about their grandparents' emigration on foot in Jewish outlets like Romsig News within Jewish Gen. This genealogical interest was spearheaded by the success of Alex Haley's multiple award-winning miniseries Roots from 1977, based on the eponymous memoir published the previous year as an effort to trace his family's African lineage. It gradually became so widespread that it was incorporated from 2012 in the highly successful PBS documentary TV series Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates Jr., in which the acclaimed Harvard professor met with celebrities and revealed to them family pasts that would usually draw the line from persecuted to perpetrator ancestors. In episode 5 from season 1, aired in April 2012, Gates Jr. had as guest Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, who became in 2014 the senior rabbi at Central Synagogue in New York City, the first woman to lead the Reform congregation and the first Asian American to be ordained as a kenta or a rabbi in North America. During the show, Buchdahl discovered how her paternal great-grandfather had been born in Moinești in 1871 and came from Romania to New York around 1900, possibly as part of a Fusgeyer group. Thanks to this TV show that has given a celebrity aura to genealogical research, the Fusgeyer story started to be incorporated in a broader discussion about the transcultural and multicultural history of America. More recently, from January 2020 to February 2022, journalist Claire Ginsburg also mentioned the Fusgeyers in her genealogical search of the unconventional interracial life of her deceased aunt she never met, Rose, her father's sister. In the 8th installment from August 2020, published in Washington Jewish News, the connection to Fusgeyers appears as a byline for the aunt's narrative. This is invoked in connection to Claire's paternal grandmother and Rose's mother, Yetta Schwartz, who came to the US from Romania in November 1903, while her husband had emigrated from Russia in 1891. Ginsburg connects the interracial struggles of 1930s, 1940s America as lived by Rose after marrying a Black person to the stateless Romanian Jewish generation of her grandmother, Yetta, who were not given Romanian citizenship because they were not Christians, giving rise to the Fusgeyer movement. In other words, the symbolic Fusgeyer possible connection becomes in remote genealogical writings like Claire Ginsburg's an imprecise, intangible historical anchor, one which can provide a flimsy intergenerational connection. In the absence of the protagonist's direct memories that are getting further and further removed and out of reach for the new generations, the Fusgeyer movement in genealogical projects serves the metaphorical function of a footnote, briefly bringing back to memory the terrible situation and emigration courage of Romanian Jews in 1900. But it also serves a dynamic comparative historical function of thinking through follow-up cases of novel human struggles from Eastern Europe and the United States. Ignited by this genealogical interest, literary representations of the Fusgeyers have been part of the American cultural sphere too. In this sense, I believe that the literary representation of this Fusgeyer movement represents another conduit upholding transcultural networks of memory work in the US, following cultural studies scholar Esfedor's emphasis that literature can be a powerful conduit of cultural memory by its use of four modes of a rhetoric of collective memory: the experiential, the mythical, the antagonistic, and the reflexive. Using these tools, it is worthwhile to scrutinize the representation of Fusgeyers in the literature produced by such immigrant Fusgeyers, Emmy Ravage's English language account and Finkelstein's Yiddish language account, and in the literature created in contemporary times, the most significant publications in this sense being Stuart Tower's historical novel and Jill Couliner's partly historical essay, partly travelogue. This is what I'm also trying to do with my project. In brief, what I see is a transition from the 1910s to 1950s assimilationist narratives of progress to a post-assimilationist narratives of migration that challenge the mythical function of the immigration destination of North America, critique hierarchies, and perform inter-ethnic dialogues and comparative assessments of prejudice and discrimination, past and present. And I end here with this kind of brief overview of the history and memory of the Fusgeyers. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Donna. That was really, really chock full of a lot of information and really fascinating. And it's really, I think the story of the Fusgeyers is such a unique and interesting type of immigration that you don't normally hear about. And, in sort of the greater picture of Jewish immigration from Eastern Europe, it's something that's just really unique. Now, if anyone has questions for Professor Mihăilescu, please leave them in the Q&A section of the Zoom. I'm just curious, can you just sort of take us through, just briefly, through the experience of a group of Fusgeyers, of how they start, how they cohered as a group, and their journey to America or to North America? I'm just wondering if you could sort of give a brief sort of skeletal outline of a thing like that.
So from what I could find, especially from this kind of memorial reconstructions from those that were Fusgeyer members, it actually was a bit more organized than one would think. They say that it was usually young people that would join together. Usually they were between 15 and 30 years old. At the beginning, there are, let's say, 6 or 10 members that come together. They meet in different locations within the locality in which they live. And they create all sorts of people that are responsible for something that the Fusgeyer group needs. So someone is responsible for being sure that they have some medicine with them on leaving. Someone else is responsible that they're going to have some food. Then there is someone who starts to train them to know how to walk and be able to walk for a long time. So basically every day they are doing physical exercises. So this is something that is possible. And many of these that were at the origin of the first Fusgeyer groups were also, I think, taken in by the adventurous aspect of it. So it was very much also connected with their youth and the fact that this was also a possibility of no longer being kept in check by their parents. And at the end of the day, they finally coalesced into an effective number of people that could go together. There were even fixed groups. So at a certain moment, they wouldn't allow newcomers to join the group. If you became part of the group, they were called societies. You had to actually give some money. So there was this kind of subscription that you are part of the society, and they used the money together in order to be able and make sure that they could go from one place to another. Some of them had musical talent, and then they would also be trained how to provide some entertainment so they could get money out of that. Others were good at theatrical performances. I even had instances of people that were actually part of the Philharmonica that were leaving with some of these Fusgeyer groups, and then the kind of performances that they gave were likely to look better. And the other thing which is interesting is how they chose the cities they go to up to the border with Austria-Hungary. Because their idea was not to go through exactly the same localities as the Fusgeyer groups that came before, because they realized that the locals would not give as much money to them. So from one group to the other, you basically have a different trajectory that they decided upon up to the border with Austria-Hungary. And it sometimes happened that they didn't go up to the border only on foot, and some of them took the train and then they got to the border. So there are lots of possibilities. And there is also this kind of thing that sometimes several groups would join together as they were getting out of Romania. So you end up with one group that had 50 people, another one that had 60 people, and then when they go on a ship, you have 110 people, and they kind of reconstruct themselves as another group. So I don't know if I answered exactly what you wanted to have, but there are lots of possibilities.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's really incredible. Like the whole experience seems really incredibly interesting. And one of the things you showed in your lecture was uh, publications that they wrote. And I guess this is somehow along the way. But one interesting thing is that they appear to be mostly in Romanian. And I'm curious to know what the level of linguistic assimilation was like for Jews in Romania at this period.
There were two categories of Ashkenazi Jews that were now in Romania at its formation. Some of them clearly had come from the Russian Empire in order to escape persecution, as Romania was creating itself as a new independent state, and they thought that it would be better for them there. And those were primarily Yiddish speakers. And there were others that had been in the territories that constructed Romania for several generations. And then many of these were actually very much assimilated and spoke Romanian. And actually, one of the person that these people will ask for help, Moses Guster, who became very well known Sephardic, that's true, a Sephardic Jew who left for London, had actually been the person that had created the first history of Romanian literature. And there were other Jews that would do the same. So you have both situations, some of them that really knew very well Romanian, and others that were primarily Yiddish speakers. But I think that the reason why they chose Romanian for their one-time publication was actually a form of, in a way, slapping the Romanian authorities and telling to them through the people that wrote them, the majority not actually being part of the emigrating groups per se, that they already know very well the values of Romania and they have served them, and look how they are being mistreated. And I actually thought about this one-time publications. I read your chapter on YIVO-bleter, which started to be published in the Russian Empire in 1894, 1895. I could not find anyone showing any continuity in point of their decision to make these newspapers with the YIVO-bleter, but I could find in point of especially the sarcasm that was part of these publications, something that might show that some of the people that were writing these papers were actually aware and followed the model from the Russian Empire.
Well, fascinating. I just want to ask one more thing before we get to the audience questions. Yeah. Like in connection to this linguistic assimilation question, when Romanian immigrants came to the United States, and they formed Landsmannschaften, what language did they use to publish their materials, or what language did they use to record their meetings? I think you froze. Wow. I unfortunately, Professor Mihăilescu's Zoom has frozen. I don't know if it'll come back. Let's give her a minute to see if it does work. I don't think she, oh, well, let's see if she comes back on. In any case, if you do have questions, please leave them in the Q&A section. Oh, you're back. Okay, good. Yeah, you froze. Oh, and you're muted.
Yeah, my connection proved no longer to be good, so I could just follow the other connection. So
okay,
I hope it's not. But I didn't hear your question. So.
Okay, the question was, just a connection to this, linguistic assimilation to Romanian. I asked what language Romanian Jewish immigrants used when they came to the United States to publish their Landsmannschaft materials, or anything else they may have.
I found things in Yiddish, like most of the times Yiddish, but also English. It's actually interesting that they also have things already published in English. And actually there is, in 1900, the Romanian Jewish community in New York had a newspaper which was published in Romanian, which was called Curierul Româno-American, the Romanian American Courier, which was very much concerned with the Fusgeyers. And it's actually interesting that they used them as this kind of, in a way, exotic displays for the rest of the people to continue to donate money for Romanian Jews. They were basically asked to come and reperform the plays they had offered on going out of Romania, so that people would continue to donate money for the Romanian Jews, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah. All right, let's get to audience questions. I'll just take them in order. When we have on average, how many miles did these Romanian Jews walk per day? Where did they sleep along the way?
I don't know how many miles. Usually they went from from one locality to the other one, which is kind of very close by. So let's say I think in kilometers, so I'm not going to help that much with that. Something like 30 kilometers would be, I think, the most that you would have in a day walking from one locality to the other. They sometimes were not allowed to, and they would stay there for at least one day in that following locality. Sometimes, most of the times, it was the Jewish locals that offered them a place to stay in their own homes. And they were like, their coming was announced beforehand, so these people would know what to expect, and they would also have enough money to be given to them. And sometimes they were not allowed to enter in the city proper, and then they would stay in the outskirts. And this is why they also had tents with them, because during nighttime, if you are not allowed by the policemen of that locality to be inside, and if it rains, you could have at least the chance of not being totally drained because of that. I don't know what else would be relevant here. Yeah, and usually in a locality, they stayed 1 day or 2 days before continuing over.
Right. Another person asks if there's any record showing how many separate Fusgeyer treks occurred, and if there's a list, if there are lists anywhere of those who participated.
No, there's not. I'm trying to write a book in which to indicate some of the trajectories, but it would be impossible to speak about real trajectories that went in one direction, because even if you think of Finkelstein, so if you follow one individual, he started with the first group of wayfarers from Burlad, but then he went to Vaslui, and in Vaslui he stayed over and left with the second group of wayfarers from Burlad. And it might be that one person is actually part of different groups if he doesn't continue on the same track. And at a certain moment, especially when they get outside Romania, some of them stay for longer in one place, some of them continue with another group. So it's really very complicated. You cannot have clear trajectories that are applicable for all the members of a group, basically.
Right, right. Oh, and in connection with Finkelstein, someone asks if if the writings have been translated into English.
Parts of it are available if you read Jill Finkelstein's book, In the Footsteps of Jewish, Finding Home in the Footsteps of Jewish Fusgeyers. What she does is actually to use mottos for each one of her chapters. And most of those mottos represent a good part of the published version of his memoir being available into English. But otherwise, there is no single place where you could find it clearly translated into English.
Right. And another question, how, if at all, is the Fusgeyer movement remembered in Romania?
Huh. This is tricky. Actually, it's not at all, almost not at all remembered in Romania. Now it's becoming known a bit because I'm actually teaching a class on Eastern European Jewish migration to the United States. And of course, I teach it to my students. So at least some of the people that come to my classes as American Studies students learn about it. But at the official level, and even from the point of view of Jewish remembrance, it's actually something that is very little known about. And interestingly, there was this exhibition that was organized in 2023 at the presidential office in Romania, which is a very nice palace in Bucharest, about immigration from the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, from Romania to the United States. And the Fusgeyers are not mentioned at all. It is primarily about ethnic Romanians' migration, but considering the percentages that during this time, actually over 80% of the people that left Romania were Jews, actually not mentioning them looked to me pretty strange. But it is what it is.
Right, right. Another question, was this immigration by foot unique to Romanian Jews, or did other Jewish groups also do this sort of?
I don't know. I'm not sure if it was unique to Romanian Jews or not. I've not heard about it as something that made that really drew so much the world attention anyway in other places than what was happening in Romania. But I cannot know for sure. Perhaps there was. I have no idea.
Right, right. I mean, just a connection to, drawing attention in that regard. There's another question asking about the great powers, Germany, the British Empire, Austro-Hungary. Did they have a response to this particular type of emigration movement?
Especially in Britain, because many of them left for London, and the Jewish community of Britain, because at that time there was a kind of reconsideration of how Jews should be treated in Britain, were actually very much against the arrival of these individuals who were likely to actually place a very bad stereotypical view on the already well assimilated Jewish population of Britain. And otherwise, in other cases, it was clear that the Jewish populations were treated better in Germany, France, and Britain, and they had social and political rights, but there was still a degree of anti-Semitism that could be seen, and the countries were much more interested in their own political well-being than in the fate of this group of people.
Right. Another question. How did Romanian Jews interact with other Yiddish-speaking Jews? Let's say how were they received, and how do they perceive other Jews?
I think that if we are looking at numbers, actually, and from what I could also see from the other autobiographies that are coming from Romania and sent to YIVO, for instance, in 1942, of people that came to the US around the same period of time that Finkelstein did, so for this kind of beginning of the 20th century, actually the majority of them, and Finkelstein himself, were not born in Romania, but they came from Russia. So many of them were already also at least partly Yiddish speaking, but they also knew Romanian from staying in Romania. So it's very mixed, and most of the families would have a parent that is born in Russia or in Poland, and another parent that is born in Romania. So there was always a very clear cut, a kind of crossing of both the culture that was coming from the Russian Empire and the culture of Romania, basically.
Right. Another person asks if it's just we're all or many of these people musicians. He says this was claimed of his grandfather, that he was. I mean, I can't imagine that everyone was a musician, but
Either.
one would imagine that some were and some weren't.
Say again what it was that you ended with.
Oh, I mean, I said that, not obviously not everyone is going to be a musician, but some
That's
or not.
yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
fairly.
The majority of them were amateur musicians, amateur performers. They were not professionals.
Right. There's this last question that I don't completely understand, and I don't know if you want to have a look at it as well, but I'll read it. It says, "Can you elaborate on the three categories of citizenship? My mother's antecedents placed her in the first one due to her ancestors' acquisition at the time of independence. There were fewer than 1,000 such families in Rigat during the World War II era." Perhaps you understand what this.
I think that it usually has to rely on the fact of how long you and your family members had been in Romania, for how many generations, and what was your social status. And usually it also gave the possibility of gaining citizenship in Romania, even during these times, to people that had been in the military and that had served in Romania's War of Independence. So if you were part of this category, it was easier to actually gain citizenship. But as the person who asked said it, there were actually no more than not even 1,000 people that actually got citizenship in this way. So.
Right. Okay. I think that's all the questions we have, and we're also out of time. So I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking Professor Dana Mihăilescu, who has been the YIVO 2024-2025 recipient in Eastern European Jewish Studies, and this is a fellowship that is funded by the Professor Bernard Chosi Memorial Fellowship and the Natalie and Mendel Racolin Memorial Fellowship. And if you liked what you heard and saw, as I did, it was a really fascinating lecture. Please consider making a donation to YIVO. We can't bring you these lectures without your support. So thanks so much, and we look forward to seeing you at the next lecture.